"You live here for free. Don't act like you're one of us," my brother said in front of everyone. I said nothing, just quietly packed my stuff and left. He called crying 3 days later because he found out who'd been paying his mortgage. I, 32M, never thought silence could be so loud. That moment when my brother said those words at the family dinner table, with Mom, Dad, his wife, and their 2 kids all sitting there, I felt every eye turn toward me. He'd been drinking, sure, but alcohol doesn't create cruelty. It just removes the filter that keeps people from showing who they really are. He told me I lived there for free and shouldn't act like I was one of them. The words hung in the air like smoke. My fork was halfway to my mouth. I set it down carefully, the clink against the plate the only sound in that suffocating silence. Nobody said anything. Not Mom, who looked down at her hands. Not Dad, who suddenly found his wine glass fascinating. Not even his wife, who at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. I stood up from the table, excused myself politely, and walked upstairs to the guest room where I'd been staying for the past year. Not because I needed to, because they'd asked me to. The packing took less time than I expected. Funny how a year of your life fits into 3 suitcases when you've been living deliberately small, trying not to be a burden. I loaded everything into my car in 4 trips. The house stayed quiet. No one came upstairs. No one knocked on my door. By the time I backed out of the driveway, the dining room curtains were drawn. I drove to a hotel that night, checked in, and sat on the bed staring at my phone. Part of me expected a call, an apology, something. Nothing came. I ordered room service, took a shower, and tried to convince myself that cutting ties was the right move. The thing is, I hadn't been living there for free. Not even close. 4 years ago, my brother came to me in a panic. He'd bought a house that stretched his budget thin. Too much house, too much mortgage, and his income wasn't stable enough to cover it. His wife was pregnant with their 2nd kid. He was terrified of losing the place, of looking like a failure, of letting his family down. He asked me for help. Not a loan, not a temporary bridge. He asked me to co-sign the mortgage refinance and cover part of the monthly payments until he got his business sorted out. He promised it would only be for a year, maybe 2. He swore he'd pay me back every penny once things stabilized. I said yes, because that's what family does, right? I covered 40% of his mortgage every month for 3 years. Nearly $2,000. I paid it directly to the bank from my account through an automatic transfer. He never saw the money leave my hands, so maybe it stopped feeling real to him. Maybe he convinced himself I wasn't really doing it. Maybe he just forgot. When his business finally started turning a profit 2 years in, he didn't mention paying me back. He bought a new truck instead. Top of the line. I didn't say anything. Family doesn't keep score, I told myself. 6 months after that, they renovated the kitchen. High-end appliances, custom cabinets, granite countertops. Must have cost 40 grand. Still no mention of the money I'd been quietly funneling into their mortgage. I started to feel stupid, but kept telling myself to be patient. Then last year, my lease ended on my apartment across town, and I was debating whether to renew or buy something. My brother called me up with this big brotherly speech about how families should stick together, how his house was huge, how I should come stay with them while I figured out my next move. Save some money. Spend time with the kids. He made it sound generous. I should have seen it then. Should have recognized the setup. I moved in and kept paying my share of the mortgage. Kept it quiet. I figured living there didn't change our arrangement. I was still helping him keep the house. But I also paid for groceries every week. I covered utilities. When something broke, I fixed it or paid for repairs. The water heater went out in February. I replaced it. Cost me $1,800. I never said a word about any of it. Then came that dinner. That moment when he decided to humiliate me in front of everyone. To make himself feel bigger by making me feel small. Maybe he'd started to believe his own revised history, where I was just a freeloader crashing at his place. Maybe his wife had been complaining. Maybe he was just drunk and mean. Didn't matter. I was done. The second night in the hotel, I made a call to the bank. I explained the situation calmly and asked about my options regarding the mortgage account. The representative told me that as a co-signer who'd been making regular payments, I had certain rights. I could request detailed payment histories. I could modify my automatic payments. I could even trigger a review of the loan terms if there were concerns about the primary borrower's ability to pay. I didn't do anything drastic that night. I just stopped my automatic payment. The transfer that was supposed to go through on the 1st of the month, 3 days away, Wasn't going to happen. I authorized the bank to cancel it. Then I waited. Day 1 after leaving. Nothing. I spent an apartment hunting. Found a decent 1-bedroom close to my office. Signed the lease. Started planning the move in. Day 2. Still nothing. I bought furniture online. Arranged deliveries. Kept my phone on. No calls. No texts. Radio silence from the family. Day 3. My phone rang at 2 in the afternoon. My brother's name lit up the screen. I almost didn't answer. Let it ring 4 times before I picked up. He was crying. Actually crying. His voice cracked and stuttered as he asked me where I was and why the mortgage payment hadn't gone through. The bank had called him that morning with a courtesy notice that the account was short. He'd checked his records and realized, apparently for the first time in months, that my automatic payment was missing. He asked me what happened, and I told him calmly that I'd stopped paying his mortgage when I moved out. Silence stretched between us. Then he asked me what I meant by his mortgage, and I explained slowly, clearly, that I'd been covering nearly $2,000 every month for the last 3 years plus the year I lived there. More silence. Then he tried to tell me that couldn't be right, that he'd been paying the full mortgage himself. I offered to send him the bank records. Every transaction. Every date. Every amount. For years of documentation. He started crying harder then, apologizing, saying he didn't know, claiming he'd lost track, insisting he never meant to take advantage of me. I asked him about the truck, about the kitchen renovation, about the fact that he'd humiliated me in front of the entire family while I was literally paying for the roof over his head. He had no answer for that. He begged me to restart the payments, just for a few months while he figured things out. His voice cracked with panic as he explained that he couldn't cover the full mortgage on his own. His business had expenses. The kids had activities. His wife didn't work. They'd structured their entire life around a mortgage payment that assumed my contribution. I told him no. He asked me how he was supposed to make the payment, and I suggested he sell the truck. He went quiet again. Then he said the truck was already financed and wouldn't cover enough. I suggested the renovated kitchen, though I knew you couldn't exactly sell that. He didn't appreciate the sarcasm. He tried anger next. Told me I was being petty and vindictive. Told me family doesn't abandon family over one stupid comment. Asked me if I was really going to let his kids lose their home because my feelings got hurt. That's when I stopped being calm. I reminded him that I'd spent 4 years helping him keep that house. 4 years of nearly $2,000 monthly, almost $100,000 total. I'd done it without complaint, without asking for recognition, without holding it over his head. And the one time I sat at his table, ate his food, existed in his space, he decided to publicly shame me and tell me I wasn't family. He'd made his choice. Now he had to live with it. The call ended with him still crying, begging me to reconsider. I hung up and blocked his number. 20 minutes later, Mom called. She'd heard everything from my brother. She asked me why I never told anyone I was paying part of the mortgage, and I explained that it wasn't anyone else's business. It was between my brother and me. He'd asked for help. I'd given it. That was supposed to be enough. She tried the guilt approach. Reminded me that family helps each other. That I shouldn't punish the kids for their father's mistake. That my brother was sorry, and people say stupid things when they drink. I asked her why nobody said anything at that dinner. Why she sat there silently while he tore me apart. Why Dad didn't step in. Why enabling his cruelty was considered family loyalty, but expecting basic respect was somehow asking too much. She didn't have an answer. Just asked me again to reconsider, to think about the kids, to be the bigger person. I told her I'd been the bigger person for 4 years. I was done now. Dad called next. His approach was more direct. He told me I was right to be angry, but that destroying my brother's financial stability wasn't the answer. That there had to be a middle ground. Some compromise. I asked him what compromise looked like. Should I pay half the mortgage instead of 40%? Should I accept being called a freeloader as long as I do it quietly? Should I apologize for having the audacity to be hurt? He went silent for a long moment, then admitted he didn't know. He just knew this was tearing the family apart. I told him the family tore itself apart when everyone chose silence over defending me. When they decided my brother's comfort mattered more than my dignity. I wasn't destroying anything. I was just finally stepping out of the wreckage. Over the next week, the calls kept coming. My brother's wife reached out, crying about how they might lose the house. How the kids asked why I left. How my brother wasn't eating or sleeping. She never once acknowledged what he'd said to me. Never apologized on his behalf. Just asked me to fix the problem I didn't create. I told her the same thing I told everyone else. I was done. My brother tried reaching out through mutual friends, sent messages through cousins, even got my aunt involved. Every message was some version of the same plea. Come back, restart the payments, save the house, think of the family. Nobody seemed to grasp that I'd been thinking of the family for 4 years while the family hadn't thought of me at all. 3 weeks after I left, I heard through the grapevine that my brother had listed the truck for sale. Then he started shopping the house around to see if they could sell and downsize. His wife got a part-time job. They pulled the kids out of their expensive sports programs. Their entire lifestyle started crumbling because it had been built on a foundation they'd taken for granted. Part of me felt bad. A small part. The part that still remembered helping him move into that house, playing with my nephew and niece, believing that family meant something. But a larger part of me felt free. I settled into my new apartment, decorated it exactly how I wanted, started saying yes to social plans I'd been putting off, reconnected with friends I'd neglected while playing the role of invisible benefactor. For the first time in years, my money was mine. My time was mine. My life was mine. 2 months after leaving, I got a letter, handwritten, from my brother. He didn't ask for money this time. He just apologized. Really apologized. Acknowledged everything he'd done, everything he'd said, everything he'd taken for granted. He explained that he'd had to sit his wife down and show her the bank records, admit how much I'd been contributing, face the reality of how badly he'd treated me. He wrote that he understood if I never forgave him, that he deserved my anger, that he'd spent weeks trying to figure out how he'd become the kind of person who could say those things to someone who'd only ever helped him. He admitted he'd been embarrassed about needing my help, that it had eaten at his pride, that instead of being grateful he'd somehow twisted it into resentment. The letter ended with him saying he hoped someday I'd give him a chance to make it right. Not financially. He knew that debt could never be repaid. But as brothers, as family, I kept the letter. Didn't respond. Wasn't ready to. 3 months after leaving, they sold the house. Moved into a rental half the size. I heard it was hard on everyone. My sister-in-law struggled with the downsizing. The kids had to change schools. My brother's business took a hit because he was too stressed to focus. The family blamed me at first. Whispered about how I'd abandoned them, how I'd been heartless, how I'd destroyed everything over pride. But slowly, the truth spread. Cousins who'd pressured me to go back learned the full story. Friends who'd thought I was being petty found out about the $100,000. People started asking my brother uncomfortable questions. Started wondering why he'd said what he said while I was literally keeping him afloat. The narrative shifted. I stopped being the villain. My brother started being the one who had to explain himself at family gatherings I no longer attended. 6 months after leaving, my brother and I ran into each other at a coffee shop. Pure coincidence. We both froze. He looked older, tired, smaller somehow. He asked if he could buy me a coffee, and after a long moment, I said yes. We sat outside, not quite looking at each other. He started talking, and I let him. He told me about therapy he'd started, about the hard conversations he'd had with his wife about entitlement and gratitude, about explaining to his kids why they'd had to move, about learning to live within his actual means instead of means subsidized by someone else's generosity. He told me the worst part wasn't losing the house. It was realizing how casually cruel he'd been to someone who'd never asked for anything in return. How he'd convinced himself his success was entirely his own while someone else paid for it in the background. I didn't say much, just listened. When he finished, he asked if there was any chance we could rebuild. Not financially, just as brothers. I told him I didn't know, that the hurt went deeper than one comment, that it was about years of being invisible, taken for granted, assumed to always be available without ever being valued. He nodded, said he understood, said he'd wait as long as it took. We finished our coffees, shook hands, went our separate ways. A year after leaving, I started occasionally showing up to family events again. Not all of them, just the big ones. Birthdays, holidays. I kept my distance from my brother. Polite but not warm. Civil but not close. He never pushed, never demanded more than I was willing to give. Slowly, painfully, he started paying me back. Not the full amount. That would take decades at his pace. But a few hundred here and there. Small deposits with notes attached. Progress payments on a debt we both knew wasn't really about money. The family dynamic changed. People treated me differently. With more respect. More awareness. Like they'd finally realized I wasn't just there to serve a function. I was a person. With limits. with dignity, with the capacity to walk away. My brother and I will probably never be close like we were before. Too much has broken, but we're finding something new. Something built on honesty instead of assumptions, on respect instead of exploitation. Sometimes I think about that dinner, that moment when he told me I wasn't one of them. How much it hurt, how much it changed everything. I don't regret leaving, not for a second, because that night taught me something crucial. Being family isn't about blood or obligation. It's about how people treat you when they think you have no choice but to accept it. The moment I proved I did have a choice, everything shifted. The power dynamic, the relationships, the understanding of who owed what to whom. I paid my brother's mortgage for 4 years because I wanted to help, because I believed in family, because I thought it was the right thing to do. I stopped paying it because I finally realized helping someone shouldn't cost you your self-respect. That generosity without appreciation becomes exploitation. That's sometimes the most important thing you can do for yourself and everyone around you is simply walk away. My brother called crying 3 days after I left because he found out who'd been paying his mortgage. But more than that, he found out who he'd become. And that discovery cost him a lot more than a house payment. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to give it a thumbs up and share it with friends or family who might enjoy it too. Your support means a lot. And if you have any thoughts, questions, or story ideas, drop them in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. See you in the next story.